She's one of the hottest radio personalities in the country, unafraid to ask the tough questions, informed, engaged, and in touch with what's happening in your neighborhood, across the country, and around the world. Frankie has a big mouth with big name guests, big topics, big ideas, and solutions. Now, here's your host, Frankie Darcell.
And welcome to yet another edition of Frankie Has a Big Mouth. Yeah, with great big guests, and we find big solutions. I do want to thank all of our viewers and listeners from not only around the country, but around the world. It is one of the fastest growing podcasts in the country, and I thank you all for that. Of course, you can find us each and every week on the iHeartRadio network, and of course, YouTube, and we thank our partners at Real Times Media and the Black Information Network. I am so excited. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to have the Honorable Senator Gary Peters join me on my podcast. First of all, Happy New Year to you, Senator. How are you?
Well, Frankie, it's great to see you, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Thank you so much. You know, it's been a busy 2022. I know I have a short period of time with you, but I always love having you on the show. And so not only on the podcast, but on the radio show as well. So we get to do two things at one time. Let's start with 2022. And some of the successes. Of course, we know that you represent Michigan. For all of those around the country that might be meeting you in this forum for the very first time. But talk about some of those wins for both you and your office and the Michiganders, and of course, the Dems as well, as we get ready for what I think is going to be an interesting 2023.
Well, it will be. 23 will be different. The Congress looks different, especially with the Republicans taking control of the House. But right now, I think we should just celebrate what was a really good session in 2022, as well as 21 in the last Congress. Meaningful legislation that was passed to help folks. And as we start the new year, I'm actually going to start with one of the more recent pieces of legislation that passed in the session, which was in the summer, and that was the Inflation Reduction Act, to deal with the fact that so many families are struggling as prices have been going up. You know, we're dealing with inflation in this country like the rest of the world is. Europeans have even higher inflation, and it's a result of the pandemic and coming out of that. Of course, energy costs because of the war in Ukraine. And so we want to, how do we figure out how do we lower costs for folks? And one of the number one areas to do that is healthcare. And starting on January 1st, just the beginning of this year, we were able to change the cost structure for the Affordable Care Act. So those individuals who are taking advantage of that will see lower premiums for the rest of this year, and saving on average about $800 a year in their health care, which is a big deal. And folks who are on Medicare, our seniors in particular, that really face really challenges with rising prescription drug costs. We were able to change that last year, so that starting on January 1st of this year, the cap on insulin payments is now in effect. If you're on insulin, it's capped at a $35 copay, which is a big deal. Many people were paying considerably more than that. The other advantage for seniors under Medicare, too, is that they will no longer have to pay any copays whatsoever for vaccines. Any vaccines, they can be immunized for flu and COVID and other things that they would want to have happen. So that was important to lower those costs. We also in that act made it really move towards energy independence. So we're not tied to these gas prices that are spiking all over the place, and making sure that we have renewable energies in this country is a big victory.
Yeah, Senator, if I can, and when you talk about the act and being able to lower this will be ongoing. This is not just based on this particular Congress or the next president. These are costs that will remain lower for both seniors and everyday people who are trying to afford their medications.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, unless the law changes, and that's not going to happen as long as we're in the Senate and have control.
Right.
You know, I will say, and I don't want to be political here, but as we pass the lower prescription drugs and reduce the cost of healthcare, that was a vote that every single Republican in the Congress voted against. And they actually introduced legislation to roll it back. But that certainly won't happen as long as Joe Biden's president and we continue to maintain the majority. You know, this year we have 51 senators. We went up by one. I was real involved in that. I actually chaired our Democratic campaign committee to hold our majority and expand it. And because of great victories that we had with Raphael Warnock and others, we were able to hold the majority and expand it. So your listeners and viewers should feel good that those prescription drug reductions aren't going away, at least for the next 2 years. We'd fight past that as well.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about moving into 2023. I know I only have a short window here. I want to get in as much as I can. What are some of the things you want those that are watching and listening to know about what we can expect? We know that the House, they're majority Republican and the Senate majority Democrat. Are there some concerns at the top of the year that we should be concerned about, or we should be watching more?
Well, I hope we're able to work together. I mean, we work in a bipartisan way. I take that very seriously, that we can find common ground. If you look in the last Congress, we were able to work in a bipartisan way on the infrastructure bill to put more money into roads and bridges and fix all of that. We passed the CHIPS Act, which is a manufacturing act to help manufacturing to have good paying jobs here in the country. So I will certainly work to do that, because anything that passes out of the Senate will have to get through the House as well. And we will work to try to find some of that common ground. And of course, President Biden can do a lot on executive actions. But I'll say one thing that we can do just in the Senate, and that's confirming appointments that the president would have on judges, for example. They have the advice and consent of the Senate. We will make sure that we get those judges appointed. And if you look at the diversity of people that have been appointed to judges under President Biden, it is dramatic in terms of women, folks of color, and all sorts of legal backgrounds, not just the typical background you see. It's really the diversity that we need in our court system. And quite frankly, we want judges who actually believe in the rule of law and believe in upholding basic civil rights and liberties. That's what happens with President Biden. And we're going to be able to continue to confirm those lifetime appointments as federal judges for the next 2 years.
Yeah. So as we get ready to move into, and I mean, I don't want to be political either, but I would be remiss if I did not have the conversation to ask the question of whether or not the charges or potential charges, the tax documents of the former president, do you think those things will sidetrack some of what the legislature in Washington is going to try and get done as we move forward in 2023? I can tell you as a taxpayer and a citizen, a U.S. citizen, that it can become kind of exhausting. And if it's exhausting for everyday people, it has to be exhausting for you all in Washington. Do you think some of what's, first of all, moving into names of who the next president might be or who may be running for president, do you think that will get in the way of some of the great work that is actually that is happening in Washington behind the scenes, like some great bills that are being passed?
Yeah, I hope not. I mean, you mentioned some of the things with the former president. That'll move into the judicial realm, the Department of Justice. They have to just kind of let the facts go where they go, and it's important. That surely people need to be held accountable. It doesn't matter what position you have in this country. All people are created equal under the law of this country, and we have to make sure that goes forward. But whenever you get into politics and the campaign season, that's always can be a distraction. But right now, I will continue to work, try to find common ground so we can work on a bipartisan way to deal with things like the rising costs that families are facing, to try to make sure we have real energy independence, to make sure that we're able to deal with the other challenges that we're facing as a country. So I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to keep working. You know me. We've known each other for a lot of years.
Long time. Let me cover these two things: manufacturing and your support of veterans as well. If we could touch on those two things before we go, and then I'll give you an opportunity for your closing comments as well. In Michigan and a lot of states, and we know Michigan, the big three, the manufacturing, and to be able to keep young people, in states like Michigan, especially, educating some of the most brilliant minds that go away to college and never come back, but increasing opportunities for manufacturing in the U.S. in general, more or less in your state in Michigan. How is that going? How do you want to respond to people about manufacturing and opportunities for jobs?
Well, I think it's a huge question, and now after what we've seen through the pandemic, it really becomes even more critical for the future. And I say that's the supply chains, is that we've sent way too many jobs overseas, and we find out that we're very vulnerable. Back in 2019, I chair Homeland Security and Government Affairs as ranking member then. I did a study of drug shortages that we have in our country. And bottom line, we found that the reason we have shortages in this country, the United States of America, is it because we're overly dependent on foreign suppliers?
Yeah,
In fact, the precursors that go into nearly every drug we use, 80% of those come from China. And in the report, this is in 2019, I wrote the report, and my conclusion was, when there is a pandemic in this country, we're going to find ourselves in a very precarious situation. Yeah. And just a few months after that, we did, and you saw what happened. We didn't have masks, we didn't have swabs. You're dependent on
baby formula was a shortage.
Shortages. So we have to make it in America. You got to have American workers. We're seeing that. You talk about the auto industry, the computer chips. The computer chips are in everything we have in our car. Even when you put the window up and down, you need a computer chip. And we're dependent on Taiwan and Korea and China and other places for it. And we have cars in Detroit that are sitting in parking lots because they have everything except the chip. We have to make those in the United States. And we think we can make them in Michigan. You're seeing it around the country. Those are good paying jobs. And then we're not dependent on foreign folks. So, we've got to bring that back. It's more urgent than ever. And that's good news for America. We're more secure. We're more resilient. And even better news is we got a lot of great paying jobs that people are going to be able to have and provide for their families. So that is something that we're going to really continue to focus on, certainly this year and next.
Good. My dad, career Marine, 27 years in the Marine Corps, brothers, nephews, and the like. So, I don't like the term, military brat. I don't think my dad didn't give us an opportunity to be a brat. My mother was a social worker. So clearly in those kinds of industries and professions, you can imagine our household. But with veterans and whether we're doing as much as we can do for the veterans and making services and healthcare, when you talk about veterans, people who serve our nation and in the greatest and bravest way, to be able to come home, retire, and get the resources that they need. Can you speak to the support of veterans right now?
Yeah, absolutely, Frankie. In fact, that was one of the major pieces of legislation we passed in the last session as well. It's called our PAC Act. And it really focused on our veterans who, when they served overseas, were exposed to toxic substances. I'm sure you're familiar with the burn pits that our Afghan veterans had in Iraq, and they breathed in all these toxins that had really major health impact. Finally, we passed legislation to help those individuals and say, if you're suffering as a result of toxic chemicals you were exposed to in the military, you can go to the VA, you get the treatment that you've earned and you deserve. And we made sure that every veteran, including expanding eligibility for Agent Orange for our Vietnam veterans as well, who were confronted with that. In fact, the PAC Act is perhaps one of the most significant veterans benefit bills passed in decades, another significant accomplishment from the last Congress. And that's going to make a huge difference in people's lives. And we have to continue to lean in. Certainly, thank you for your father's service. And, the men and women who went into harm's way, they stood up for the country. We need to stand behind them when they come home for as long as they're with us.
Good. The Honorable Senator Gary Peters is my guest. Your closing comments.
Well, just thank you, Frankie. Thanks for having me on the program. And I just say, thank you, because when we're talking about issues that impact people, sometimes in the media, you get little sound bites. You don't believe in sound bites. You believe in really getting into the details, find out exactly what's going on, and you're never afraid to speak truth to power. So God bless you.
Thank you, Senator.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, and an incredible year for you. Happy New Year to you. And you're always welcome here. And know that one of the reasons I enjoy having you on as well is because you are on the front line. You're always working for Michiganders, but not only Michiganders, but for people around the country are affected. When you talk about healthcare, drug costs, that affects people around the country. You are on the front line. And, I have to know all the important people at the table making the decisions. So thank you for always making yourself available, not to me, but to my viewers and my listeners. So I appreciate you. And on behalf of all of my listeners and viewers, we appreciate you. Thank you so much, Senator Peters.
Well, thank you very much, and have a blessed day.
You do the same. I'm Frankie Darcell. Don't forget, come check us out every other week on the iHeartRadio network. Of course, wherever you may get your podcast, Real Times Media, and the Black Information Network. Until next time, I told you, yes, I do have a big mouth. It's only because I have big guests and we have big solutions. Thank you again, Senator. I appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Frankie Has a Big Mouth. Find us on the iHeartRadio app, the Black Information Network, Real Times Media, or wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time for more compelling conversations.